Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Miller. I am 29 years old and I live in Ohio. For most of my life, I truly believed I had everything under control. I am not rich or extraordinary in any sense, but I worked hard, kept my head down, and tried to build something solid for myself. I had a plan, a career, and most importantly, peace. Or at least I thought I did. Until my family decided I was their personal real estate agent. To start from the beginning, I have always been the dependable one, the responsible child, the old soul, the one who handled things, even when I was far too young to be handling them. My dad remarried when I was 13. Denise came into our lives with her bleached smile, long manicured nails, and what I can only describe as a permanent princess complex. She had two sons from her previous marriage, Ethan and Cody, both of whom were loud, spoiled, and completely unaccustomed to hearing the word no. My dad, who had always been a people pleaser, fell right into her rhythm. Suddenly, our house was filled with shopping bags, scented candles, and an endless chorus of Denise's sighs about being emotionally drained. While she lounged around recovering from stress, I was working part-time at the local diner to help pay the electric bill after my dad lost his job. I remember being 16, counting tips late at night while Denise sobbed dramatically in the living room because life was just so unfair. Ashley, my younger sister, was only 10 at the time, and she quickly learned that batting her eyelashes and agreeing with Denise got her whatever she wanted. Meanwhile, I became the background adult, the one who made sure the fridge had food and the laundry was done, the one who signed permission slips and kept the household running while everyone else pretended not to notice how unbalanced everything really was. By the time I turned 18, I had no illusions left about what family meant in that house. I worked 2 jobs while taking night classes in accounting. I did not have time to go out or date much. My life revolved around surviving and building a future that belonged to me, not to anyone else. When I finally graduated, I found a steady job at a small accounting firm. It was not glamorous, but it was stable, and for the first time, I had enough money to start saving. Years passed, and little by little, I scraped together enough to put a down payment on a modest 2-room apartment. It is not fancy. It is the kind of place with creaky floors and an outdated kitchen, but when I got those keys, I cried. It was mine. No one could take it away from me. I painted the walls myself, bought secondhand furniture, and even installed a small bookshelf by the window where I could read in the evening. For once, I had peace. Ashley, on the other hand, went in the opposite direction. She got married at 23 to a guy named Brandon, who introduced himself to the family as an entrepreneur. Translation: he sells sneakers on Facebook Marketplace and calls it a business. He is one of those men who constantly talks about grind culture, but has never actually worked a 40-hour week in his life. They have 2 kids now, both under the age of 5. I love my nieces, but even love has limits when you are constantly watching your sister struggle because she refuses to face reality. Their apartment is small and messy, mostly because neither of them cleans. Every time I visit, the sink is piled high with dishes, toys are scattered everywhere, and Brandon is sitting on the couch playing video games while Ashley complains about being exhausted. She often drops hints about how unfair life is, how she deserves a bigger place, and how kids need space to grow. I always nod politely and change the subject. I have learned that logic does not work with her. Then came the family barbecue last month. My dad hosted it in their backyard. It was a warm day, one of those late summer afternoons that should have been pleasant. I brought a salad, stayed mostly quiet, and hoped to get through it without drama. Denise, as always, was dressed like she was attending a garden party instead of a cookout. Halfway through the meal, she looked at me across the table with that faux, sweet smile she always wears when she is about to say something vile. She said, "You know, honey, it's selfish to keep such a big place all to yourself when your sister is crammed in a 1-bedroom with kids. Don't you think it'd be better if you gave her your apartment and moved somewhere smaller, maybe a studio since you're single?" I thought she was joking. I actually laughed, but then I realized no one else was laughing. My dad stared at his plate. Ashley looked at me expectantly, like Denise had just made the most reasonable suggestion in the world. I said, Excuse me, my apartment? Ashley rolled her eyes and said, Well, you don't even like cooking. You could live anywhere. My kids need space to grow up. I reminded them that I worked 2 jobs in my early 20s, saved for years, and was still paying off my mortgage. Denise waved her hand dismissively and muttered under her breath, What a loser! Can't even help family! That was the first time it hit me. They were serious, completely serious. I left the barbecue early, went home, and tried to shake it off. I told myself they were being ridiculous and that it would blow over. But that night, Ashley called me. The moment I picked up, she started screaming that I was selfish and ungrateful, that I had no heart, that she and her kids deserved better. She said, You don't even need all that space. You're just hoarding it out of spite. Before I could respond, she hung up. 10 minutes later, Denise texted me a string of passive-aggressive messages about family duty and helping those who need it most. I thought that was the end of it, but the next morning I woke up to loud banging on my door. It was Ashley and Denise. Ashley was holding one child on her hip while the other cried in the stroller. Denise was red-faced, shouting about how she was done waiting for me to grow a conscience. I did not open the door. I stood there in my living room, heart pounding, listening to Denise's voice echo through the hallway as she told my neighbors I was turning my back on family. After 15 minutes of that circus, I texted my dad and asked if this was his idea. His response came a few minutes later. Let's all calm down. Maybe you can compromise. Compromise apparently meant me handing over my deed like I was giving away Halloween candy. The family group chat exploded after that morning standoff like someone had dropped a grenade made of entitlement and hypocrisy. My phone lit up nonstop for hours, buzzing with angry texts, voice notes, and guilt-laden emojis. Denise was the first to fire off a message, typing, You'll regret treating your sister this way. Blood is thicker than money. She even added a heart emoji, which somehow made it worse. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then calmly replied, Money paid for my mortgage. Blood didn't. The message was seen immediately, and within seconds, the typing bubbles appeared again. Ashley sent a dramatic, paragraph-long rant about how family is supposed to lift each other up, and how I was heartless for hoarding space while her kids slept like sardines. Denise followed up with a line that sounded like it came straight out of a bad Hallmark movie about family loyalty. My dad, of course, stayed silent. He never steps in until he absolutely has to. By the time the dust settled that evening, I had about 30 unread messages and a stress headache pounding behind my eyes. I muted the group and made myself tea, trying to pretend I didn't care. But that's the thing about family. They know how to hit where it hurts. The guilt, the manipulation, the quiet implication that if you don't bend over backward, you're the villain. I kept thinking about all the times I had picked up their slack. The memories came flooding in like a bad montage. Me at 17, forking over my paycheck to help cover the water bill because Denise was too overwhelmed to manage the finances. Me at 19, giving Ethan gas money because he wrecked his mom's car and begged me not to tell her. Me at 23, slipping Ashley a couple $100s to cover her wedding dress because she had already maxed out 2 credit cards. But now, apparently, I was selfish. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my dad calling. His voice was tired, like he had spent the entire day caught in the crossfire. He started by saying he just wanted to mediate. That word alone made my stomach tighten because I already knew what it meant. He wanted me to cave for the sake of keeping the peace. He said Ashley was drowning financially, that she had borrowed $300 from them just that week for groceries, and that I should think about stepping up as the more stable one. I took a deep breath and told him maybe she should ask her husband to get an actual job. There was silence on the other end, the kind that stretches out long enough to make you question if the line has dropped. Then he sighed. That long, heavy exhale he always does when he's about to say something disappointing. He said, "You've always been difficult." That one sentence hit me harder than I expected. Difficult. The word echoed in my head like a slap. Difficult because I stopped letting them take advantage of me. Difficult because I refused to be the family's unpaid safety net anymore. I could feel the anger rising, not the hot, impulsive kind, but the slow, quiet burn that comes from years of being taken for granted. I remembered the teenage version of myself, standing at the register of that diner in my greasy apron, counting out tip money to make sure there was enough left over for groceries. I remembered Denise crying about being exhausted after a day at the spa while I washed dishes. I remembered Ashley bragging about how her new husband was going to make it big, only to call me 6 months later asking for money because his sneaker sales had flopped. Difficult? I wanted to laugh at the irony. For years, I had been their safety net, their fixer, the one who quietly made sure things didn't fall apart. I had been the background adult while everyone else played the role of helpless victim. And now, the moment I set a boundary, I became the problem. It was almost funny in a tragic kind of way. Something shifted in me in that moment. I realized I was done trying to win their approval, done explaining, done proving that I was not the selfish one. I was not going to keep bleeding just so they could stay comfortable. I had earned my peace, and I was not going to hand it over for their convenience. I told him, in the calmest voice I could manage, that if he ever mentioned me giving away my apartment again, he would not be invited over. Period. There was another long silence on the line, the kind that carries both disbelief and resentment. Then he said nothing at all. He hung up on me. 2 days after my dad hung up on me, I thought the drama had finally started to die down. The family group chat had gone silent. No guilt trips, no passive-aggressive Bible quotes from Denise, no all-caps messages from Ashley. I took that as a small victory. I even slept better for a night or two, telling myself that maybe they had finally accepted that I wasn't going to hand over my apartment like some kind of charity prize. But peace in my family never lasts long. It was a Wednesday morning, quiet and uneventful, until chaos walked right through the glass doors of my office. I was at my desk, halfway through reconciling a client's expense report, when I heard my name being shouted across the lobby. I looked up and saw Ashley storming in, her toddler balanced on one hip, and her face red with fury. Everyone in the office turned to look because who expects a screaming woman with a child to show up at an accounting firm at 9:30 in the morning? She didn't care about the audience. She marched straight up to the reception desk and shouted, "So you're really going to watch your niece grow up in a shoebox while you live in luxury?" The words echoed off the walls. My receptionist, poor Linda, looked like she wanted to melt into her chair. I stood up, heart pounding, because I could feel the heat of every pair of eyes in that lobby. My coworkers were frozen, staring, trying to decide whether this was an episode of daytime TV or an HR problem in real time. I walked over and told Ashley that my so-called luxury was a 2-room apartment with IKEA furniture and a bathroom still decorated with pink tiles from the 70s. She didn't care. She started going off about how family was supposed to help each other and how her kids didn't deserve to live like prisoners. She said the word luxury again, like I was lounging in a penthouse somewhere, sipping champagne while she suffered in poverty. I could smell the faint scent of baby powder and cold coffee clinging to her clothes, the chaos of her morning following her right into my workplace. The toddler on her hip started crying, probably overwhelmed by the noise, and for a moment I felt a flash of pity. Then I remembered how she and Denise had stood outside my apartment door screaming insults 2 days earlier, and the pity evaporated. Linda, bless her, tried to de-escalate. She offered Ashley a chair and said she couldn't cause a disturbance in a professional environment. That only made things worse. Ashley snapped at her to mind her business and said she was having a private family matter. By then, our office manager had come out of his office, eyebrows raised, already holding his phone like he was about to call security. I kept my voice calm and told Ashley to leave before she embarrassed herself any further. That was the final straw for her. She called me cold, heartless, and her favorite word lately, selfish. She said I didn't understand real love because I'd never had a family of my own. That one stung, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. Instead, I turned to Linda and told her to escort Ashley out. It took both Linda and the office manager to gently but firmly guide her toward the door. all while she kept ranting about how I'd changed and how success had gone to my head. I stood there, frozen, watching my sister, grown woman, mother of two, throw a tantrum in the middle of my workplace, like a teenager who'd been told no for the first time. When the doors finally shut behind her, the lobby fell silent except for the faint crying of her toddler as they disappeared down the sidewalk. The rest of the day was a blur of embarrassment and exhaustion. Coworkers tried not to look at me too directly, pretending they hadn't just witnessed a soap opera in real life. My boss called me into his office later and told me not to worry, that it was understandable, but the look on his face told me he was reconsidering whether I came with too much family baggage. I went home that evening, drained, emotionally hollow, and more angry than I wanted to admit. I had worked so hard to build a professional image, to be seen as competent and reliable, and my sister had managed to shatter that in 10 chaotic minutes. When I finally sat down on my couch that evening, I turned on my phone to see if she'd tried to message me again. She hadn't, but her husband had. Brandon, the self-proclaimed entrepreneur, had sent me a Facebook message that started with a single line, "Real family sacrifices you'll understand when you grow up." I actually laughed out loud. The man was 2 years older than me and still acted like a teenager running a get-rich-quick scheme out of his mom's basement. I clicked on his profile just to see if he had posted another one of his ridiculous motivational quotes about grind culture or manifesting success. Of course, he had a grainy photo of sneakers with a caption about "The hustle never sleeps." The irony was painful. He genuinely thought selling Yeezys on layaway made him a businessman. He constantly bragged about being his own boss. Yet his wife was the one borrowing grocery money from our dad. I stared at his message for a full minute, the kind of disbelief that borders on amusement, before I typed my reply. I told him to come back when he could pay for a Happy Meal without borrowing from his wife's Venmo. If I thought Ashley showing up at my workplace was the peak of family insanity, I was wrong. That was just the warm-up act. Denise, never one to let someone else hold the spotlight for long, decided she needed to raise the stakes. She had always been the queen of control, the self-appointed director of our family's little soap opera, and she couldn't stand being ignored. So she upped the game in a way that made even Ashley's public meltdown look tame. She called my boss. Yes, my actual boss. The man who signs my paychecks. It happened on a Thursday morning. I was in the middle of explaining quarterly reports to a client when I got an email from my boss asking me to stop by his office. Nothing unusual at first, until I saw the smirk he was trying to hide when I walked in. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said that he had just received a very interesting phone call from a woman claiming to be my stepmother. She had introduced herself as Denise, and in her best concerned family member voice, told him that I was unstable, manipulative, and taking advantage of my family. I could feel the heat rising in my face as he explained it, but before I could panic, he started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh. He said, "Don't worry, I know exactly who she is." It turns out he already knew all about my dramatic stepmom saga because I had shared bits and pieces during lunch breaks or coffee runs. My coworkers loved those stories. They treated them like sitcom episodes, complete with running jokes about Denise's princess spa emergencies and Ashley's entrepreneurial husband who thought Venmo was a business strategy. Apparently, the stories had circulated enough around the office that Denise had become an inside joke. My boss told me that when he realized it was her, he put her on speakerphone so the HR manager could hear too. She had gone on a long-winded monologue about how I was emotionally erratic, how I had cut off my family in a fit of anger, and how it was deeply concerning for someone in a financial position to act without compassion. He said she sounded rehearsed, like she was trying to audition for some melodramatic family intervention show. He finally stopped her mid-rant and told her that he didn't see any problem with my professionalism or my private life. Then he hung up. When he told me all this, I wanted to be mortified, but instead I laughed too. It was so absurd that it looped right back around to funny. He told me, half jokingly, You've got a fan club here now. Never stop telling us these updates. I left his office, both relieved and exasperated. Only Denise could think calling my employer to sabotage my career was a reasonable next move in her crusade to guilt me into giving up my apartment. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not the screaming kind of anger, but that deep, simmering frustration that comes from realizing someone is trying to ruin something you've built with your own effort. It wasn't enough that she had turned Ashley against me. Now she wanted to mess with my livelihood too. That evening, after pacing my apartment for a solid half hour, I decided to confront her directly. I drove to their house, rehearsing what I was going to say. Denise opened the door like she had been expecting me, wearing her silk robe and holding a glass of wine. Her expression was smug, like she was ready to perform another one of her emotional monologues. I didn't give her the chance. I told her that calling my boss crossed a line. She scoffed, tossed her hair over her shoulder, and said she had been worried about me, that she just wanted to help because I was isolating myself. She said it in that syrupy tone she uses when she wants to sound like the victim. I told her that trying to ruin my job wasn't helping. That's when her mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed and she spat out, "You'll never find a man living like a hermit in that little apartment. At least Ashley has a family." She said it with that perfect mix of disdain and pity, the kind that only Denise could master. It was supposed to be a jab at my single life, at the fact that I wasn't playing the domestic role she thought women were supposed to play. I didn't even hesitate before I shot back that Ashley had a family. Yes, but a family she couldn't afford. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't regret them. Denise gasped like I had physically slapped her. Her hand flew to her chest, and she looked at me as if I had just insulted royalty. For a moment, I thought she might throw her wine glass, but instead, she just turned on her heel and stormed into the living room. That reaction alone was worth it. The silence that followed was glorious. For the next week, she didn't call, didn't text, didn't even attempt one of her passive-aggressive guilt messages. My dad stayed quiet, too, probably because he knew better than to bring it up again. Ashley must have been busy dealing with her own chaos because she didn't reach out either. The family group chat went dead. No motivational memes from Denise, no updates about Ashley's kids, no guilt trips disguised as loving reminders. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner in my tiny pink-tiled kitchen, and actually enjoyed the quiet. There were no interruptions, no accusations, no drama. My phone stayed blissfully silent. I didn't realize how much mental space my family had been taking up until it was finally empty. She didn't speak to me for a week, which was bliss. The grand finale happened last Sunday, and to be honest, I should have seen it coming. After a week of silence and Denise's wounded princess act, I knew the peace couldn't last. My dad called midweek, his tone all gentle diplomacy, inviting me over for family dinner. I almost said no, but part of me wanted closure. I figured if I could sit through one awkward meal, maybe we could finally put all this to rest. I was wrong. When I got to their house, everything looked suspiciously pleasant. The table was set with Denise's floral china, the roast was already carved, and there were candles burning, which was never a good sign. Denise greeted me with a brittle smile, the kind that said she was pretending to forgive me for something I hadn't done. Ashley and Brandon were already there. Ashley with her perfect fake grin, and Brandon scrolling through his phone like he couldn't be bothered to look up. My dad gave me this uneasy smile, the one that always means he's trying to convince himself he's not about to betray me. I sat down, and for a few minutes, it was almost normal. We talked about the weather, my job, and Ashley's kids. I relaxed slightly, thinking maybe for once they were just going to have dinner like a normal family. Then Ashley put down her fork and looked right at me. All smiles and syrupy sweetness. She said they'd found a bigger place for the kids. A fresh start, as she put it, but the deposit was $2,000. I blinked, already feeling that familiar pit in my stomach. Before I could respond, she added that, since I wouldn't give them my apartment, the least I could do was help cover the deposit. Denise jumped right in, nodding enthusiastically and saying it was only fair. My dad didn't say a word. He just kept cutting his roast into tiny pieces, pretending not to hear. That was the moment something inside me snapped for good. I'd played the role of the responsible daughter, the fixer, the helper, the family's emotional ATM for years. I had listened to their sob stories, cleaned up their messes, loaned money I never got back, and smiled through the guilt trips. I was done. Completely, absolutely done. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. The fork slipped out of my hand and hit the plate with a loud clatter that made everyone jump. I told them I was going to talk about fairness since they loved that word so much. I reminded them that when Dad lost his job, I was 17 and still working part-time to cover the electric bills so we wouldn't lose power. I told Denise she still owed me $200 for spa money she borrowed back in 2012 because she was too stressed to handle unemployment. I reminded Ashley about the $500 I gave her for her wedding dress when she maxed out her credit card. I listed every single thing I had done for them, every time I'd stepped up when they couldn't, and then I added that if we were talking about fairness, they now owed me about $3,000 with interest. I told them they could Venmo me when they got the chance. The silence that followed was heavy enough to choke on. Ashley's mouth fell open like she couldn't believe I had the nerve to speak to her that way. Denise went pale, clutching her pearls, literally because of course she was wearing pearls, as if I had just desecrated the family name. My dad looked like he wanted to disappear into his mashed potatoes. Then, from across the table, Brandon muttered under his breath that I was crazy. I didn't hesitate for a second. I told him that maybe I was, but I was a crazy woman with her own apartment. Then I grabbed my bag, turned around, and walked out. I didn't look back. Driving home that night, I felt this strange mixture of fury and relief. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. The weight of their expectations, their endless manipulations, their guilt, gone. I finally understood that some people don't want help, they want control, and I had taken that power away from them. The real kicker came 2 days later. I was sitting on my couch eating takeout noodles and watching some mindless TV show when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ashley. No apology, no guilt trip, just one line, "We're moving out of state." Apparently, Brandon had been offered a job with his cousin in Indiana, and they were packing up to leave by the end of the month. I stared at the message for a while, feeling nothing. Not sadness, not happiness, just a quiet sense of finality. Denise, of course, was devastated. My dad told me she had been moping around the house all week, wailing about how her favorite child was abandoning her. She tried to guilt me into being sympathetic, saying things like, "Your sister won't have anyone out there." I blocked him for a week. Since then, life has been calm in a way I didn't think was possible. My apartment, my little 2-room space with the creaky floors and the hideous pink-tiled bathroom, feels more like home than ever. I light a candle in the evenings, pour myself a glass of cheap wine, and sit by the window watching the city lights flicker. I've started picking up extra projects at work because I actually have the mental space to focus again. My boss still teases me about the next episode of the Miller family drama and jokes that if I ever write a book, he'll buy the first copy. It's funny how everything feels different when you finally stop apologizing for living your own life. For so long, I thought peace meant keeping everyone else happy. Now I know it's about drawing a line and never letting anyone cross it again. My family can call me cold, selfish, difficult, whatever word makes them feel better, but at least I'm free. I pay my bills, sleep in my own bed, and answer to no one. Turns out, sometimes the best revenge is just living well while your family runs out of people to leech from. If you made it this far, thank you for reading my wild family saga. If it gave you a laugh, a bit of catharsis, or just made you feel a little less alone in your own chaos, give it a like, leave a comment, or follow for more stories. I promise if my family ever pulls another stunt, you'll be the first to know.